So just before I introduce our speaker for today, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Katie Oldfield. I'm a Senior Engagement Manager at Research Data Scotland. Research Data Scotland works with researchers, analysts and policymakers to make it faster and simpler to access public sector data for research through our Researcher Access service. We're a PEDRI partner, so it's fantastic to be part of this workshop today. At Research Data Scotland, we're committed to involving and engaging members of the public and communities in data research. And our comms team work hard to make sure we're transparent about the processes around data and to make that engaging for people. We've also funded projects to do this sort of work as well through our Public Engagement Fund. So I was delighted to be asked to come along and host this session because Anna has done a fantastic amount of work in all of these areas. So I will move on to introducing our speaker for today and let her get on with what you're all here to find out. Professor Anna Feigenbaum is a professor of media and digital storytelling at the University of Glasgow. She's an expert in data storytelling and an author of the Data Storytelling Workbook. She specialises in co-creating impactful data stories through research, consultancy and bespoke training engagements. In this webinar, Anna will be drawing on her work with the Wessex Secure Data Environment, where she co-created resources with researchers, creatives, and the public to help connect with diverse communities. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Anna.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you guys all for coming. It's a privilege to be invited here to speak with you. And this is actually the first time that I've gotten to talk about this specific project. So I'm really excited to share it with you. And I'll give you a little bit more of my background and just to say how it's going to work today is I'm going to work you through this specific case study that we did for Wessex Secure Data Environment, but I'm also going to give you just some general tips and tricks. There's going to be a lot of information. I will try not to talk at New York speed, but everything that I'm going to talk about is in more detail in that data storytelling workbook. And we're also hoping to do a little bit more kind of in-depth look at some of the things that I'm going to do in a different collaboration with PEDRI. So watch this space for that, and do ask questions about anything that I might have touched on briefly but didn't get into too deeply. So just to say, I actually started not in health data, but in humanitarian data. And I started working in humanitarian data during the big kind of boom of data visualization and data journalism that was happening about 15 years ago. And then I moved into the health area in about 2017. And this is just a little kind of visual sample of some of the things I've worked on and some of the people that I've gotten to work with. And I've really enjoyed, and obviously COVID as well as a chronic health condition that I have kind of moved me into this health space. And I find it a really exciting and undertapped kind of place. And this merge of data and health, I think is a really exciting time to be using some of these techniques that have been developed in other fields that we can continue to amplify in the field of health data storytelling. So this is a data storytelling workbook, just a quick peek at it. And so I'm going to be touching on a few of the many themes that are in this workbook today. So first, I just want to give a little bit of a definition about what I mean by data storytelling. I used to joke that I loved being a professor of digital storytelling because nobody really knows what digital is and nobody really knows what storytelling is. But people would always ask me what this meant. And so I now have a bit of a definition I like to use. And the big thing that I think is really important as a takeaway, and one of the big barriers often to entry into this space, is that people think that data storytelling has to be really, really, really complicated and expensive, and has to involve things like giant globes that we can project, very complicated like social networks onto, but it doesn't. It can be, and it's great if you have £1 million to build the globe, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people have maybe £500 or maybe £1,000, or if they're lucky, £10,000 to do this kind of work. And so I think it's really important that we understand data storytelling to be something that can be very simple, as well as something that can be complicated and also something that can be cheap, as something that can be expensive. And so to me, it's more about how we best utilize the communication tools and storytelling techniques to get our message across to our intended audiences. And we might include in there the practicals, like how to best utilize the budget that we have to do these things and the resources and the time that we have to do these things. So good storytelling, as many of us here know, requires figuring out how to turn complex subject matter into content that is easy to understand and engage with. And this is a kind of classic science comms. We're a little bit better at this part of things than we are at some of the visual things. So good visual data storytelling has to do with balancing the visuals and the text that we're using in ways to best convey our messages. And one of the key aspects to doing that, and this is what we do in the very first step of any data storytelling project that we work on, or any time that we're trying to communicate or use storytelling with different audiences, the very first thing we do is identify where our audience is at in terms of the data literacy level and their interest in what we're talking about. So I'm not going to go too much into this today, but this is a little chart that we've kind of put together. And when we're giving trainings or working with particular groups, we bespoke this chart to that particular group and to their particular audiences. And it can also be really useful to run this across multiple audiences that you have and identify that early on. And again, in the workbook, you'll see some worksheets that go through this. And I can also might send around a little worksheet pack if you guys would like. You can tell me in the Q&A of some of the graphics that I'm sharing with you today. So that's a kind of our sort of basic, this is what we think data storytelling is, and this is where we start. And then once we've got that, we go through these kinds of 5 steps, and these steps might change a little bit depending on the project. And today, because I'm talking about a public engagement project, I have a version of this that I would use particularly for when I'm doing co-creation. And these 5 steps, and we'll go through each of them, are conceptualizing, writing, visualizing, looping back, so making sure that we're going back. And this might be an iterative thing. It might not be literally step 4. It might be that we conceptualize, loop back, write, loop back, visualize, loop back with whoever it is that our stakeholders or our co-creation group that we're working with. But we definitely want this step in there, and we want it before the end. And then 5, promoting, disseminating, whatever we want to call it. So the case study I'm going to use, and as well as these kind of general tips, is something that we did for the Wessex SDE community video project. I won't go too much into this, what the secure data environment is, because I assume a lot of people on this call know, but you can read our kind of attempt to make a public definition for it on the slide. And so our aim for this particular, and this is part of a much bigger public engagement package we were doing for Wessex SDE. And I'm going to focus today particularly on a video project that we did with a youth group called Yellow Brick Road. And it was with a young parents group from the Yellow Brick Road community project. And importantly, there was already a relationship between the PPI facilitator at the University of Southampton that we were working with and this group. So when we came in, we were coming into an established relationship and an established trust, which is a wonderful way to get to start. So we were lucky that that pre-work had already been done when we went in to do something that was a bit more hands-on and co-creative. And so this is a project, you can read all the collaborators at the bottom, also involved a bunch of other people. And some of the other things, you're going to see some glimpses of some of the other pieces of work that we made because they underpinned this piece of work. So we also made videos with different scientists, so more classic science communication, who were using the SDE. And we did a big video at the end that was about impact capture with like 100 participants that had been part of the kind of SD governance process. And then we also did a bunch of print materials and some motion graphic animation and a glossary. And you'll see some little bits of some of these as you go. But I'm going to focus again on these youth group videos today. So our first step is always conceptualizing. And conceptualizing is about creating, on the one hand, a visual space, and on the other hand, a project archive. And this is a really important step. It looked like 48% of you guys are coming at this as data people. And data people often are very good at numbers and sometimes quite good at text, but often not always visual people, not people who think to start or start to think through the visual, which more creative people do. Creative people often think visually before they write anything down or before they would even look at data. They're starting to think from what do I want it to look like? And that's a really different place to start. And it's really important, if you're not the creative on a project or you're going to work with creatives, to get into that mental space so that you're thinking visually and creatively as well about what you're doing. And this also serves to archive your project as you go and to create a shared living resource that everyone can use. And we tend to use these kinds of digital tools for it, but it's also possible that you could have a kind of analog version of this concept space, or that you might get together with your group, and this might be one of the first activities that you would do together. So we use Miro for the kind of broader SDE project. I have lots of good things to say about Miro. For this project, what's particularly useful is that you can just drop a link to a YouTube video and it actually embeds the video into the Miro board. So we could collect all these different kind of video examples of projects that we wanted to draw on. So highly recommend in your conceptualizing phase to use one of these digital tools, use it with your team, find out what your team's comfortable with. You might even need to do a little training session if you want to get everyone on board to use these kinds of tools. So the second phase is writing. And again, especially for the public engagement folks in the room, this might be something we're a little bit more comfortable with. We've had more years of practice. And we also have a lot of tools these days to help us with writing. One of the things that has influenced the work that I've done with the graphic design partners I have, Open and Honest, we've been working together for 10 years, and we are very much inspired by XKCD, and some of you might recognize this thing explainer, which uses the most common 1,000 words to explain technical devices. And the amazing thing about it is that it simplifies without dumbing down what it's talking about. And it's just a wonderful example also of that balance between word and image. So I highly encourage, if you don't know XKCD, to take a look at it for inspiration. They've also made this little Upgoer 5, this little kind of interface where you can play and you can put in the word you want and see, or the phrase you want to say, or the sentence you want to say, and see what would happen if you translated that into the top 1,000 most used words. And so the one you're seeing on screenshot on the screen is for tear gas, which is one of my humanitarian projects. The other thing, of course, that probably lots of you already use is ChatGPT. And here, what I would say, something I found really useful with ChatGPT is if you kind of think of it as like you're triangulating different audiences. So we go back to that data literacy 5 audience model, and we think, okay, how would we explain this to a generalist, to a novice, to a colleague? And we ask it to take on the role of being different kinds of audience members. And then we can see how it's changing the language structure in order to kind of figure out where we want to go with the language. And so we use it almost like as if we were doing a focus group or with like a test audience. And so just really encourage people to be creative and go back and forth a lot. If you are using ChatGPT to write text, don't just put in what you wanted to say and have it rewrite it for you. The second thing that, and academics and often data people are very bad at or struggle with, myself included, is knowing which details to pick when and for who. So we often really don't want to abandon the detail because the nuance, that specificity, the not overclaiming and the not making anything sound like correlation that isn't, all of these things we're so mindful of. And that is really important as researchers and as data analysts, that we are really mindful of this. But once we're doing public engagement and public communication, we really have to pick the details that are the most important. And this is another little tool that we use called the 2 ticks minimum. I'm not sure that such a thing exists so much in the UK, but in the US, there's many times you go in somewhere and you have to order 2 drinks in order to go see a show. And so we call this the 2 ticks minimum, and it means that you shouldn't be using any detail or any piece of information if it doesn't meet at least 2 of these requirements. So again, we've got a little worksheet on this that I'm happy to share with people. So it's, again, just another little thing to help guide us when we're trying to whittle down the text that we need. So for this project, for the writing phase, one of the things that we did before we went and did the other forms of public engagement was we wanted to distill some of the tricky concepts that are important for gaining kind of public literacy and public understanding in order to have meaningful contributions to public engagement by creating a set of glossary cards that explain these kinds of basic components that are actually very, very complicated data terms. So we spent a lot of time refining and testing text, working between researchers, right, who don't want to lose those details, and members of the public. So we did this through a previous set of PPIE in which we got feedback from over 500 people through a bunch of different meetings that community facilitators were running. So again, this was a quite sizable team and for public engagement, quite a sizable budget. And we wanted to kind of determine what data literacy level are the key audiences we're at, and kind of what terms were people struggling with, and what were we kind of taking for granted in knowledge that wasn't necessarily there. And so these are just a little visual of some of the main themes that came out of that kind of big multi-group PPIE project. So then what I did is I got the PPIE report, and with my kind of public engagement hat on, design hat on, I went through and I created a design brief in which I incorporated what I thought we most needed to focus on. And again, this is really thinking about balancing those words with those visuals. How do we remove detail? What is most at stake? What do people most want to know about? Because we have to always be prioritizing in this kind of work. And so the public feedback that we got not only shaped the text, but also how we styled and formatted the text. And this kind of bleeds into the visual choices that we made. And so you can see here, this is a little excerpt of how I create that design brief to be like, okay, here's what people said. Here's what the design implications of what people said are. And so this is also just a little glimpse into our actual process, where we're layering and writing and editing constantly onto these forms as we get new feedback in. And so the public input that we got shaped this visual style telling approach that we went with, which was to kind of mirror a sort of WhatsApp conversation using these little text boxes, and to really strip back the visuals and to have a human face or human element that was doing this kind of explaining. So this is where the text and the visual kind of meet each other, but these are actually stylistic choices about text and how we present text, and it's using design to solve the problem that's actually a problem of communicating text. Which is slightly different than the kind of visualizing that I'm going to talk about here, but of course there's a visual element to that as well. So in step 3, visualizing, again, there's one of the first things that we always ask when we start a new project is, does a visual language for what we're talking about already exist? Or are we doing something that is really nuanced, or that for whatever reason that we want to do something different than what already exists? And so if we're doing something where we think the graphics already exist, we don't think we really need innovative graphics, we just need to find some good ones that look nice, then of course some tools I'm sure people here are already using, Canva, things like Flickr, and Wikimedia Commons, you can go on to those ones that don't have any copyright restrictions. And the Noun project, if anyone hasn't heard of that, is a wonderful resource for looking at icons and symbols. And they have some things that are a little bit different and more expansive than you get sometimes in tools like Canva. On the other side of the slide, you're seeing a bespoke graphic set that our design team made, not for one of our projects, but for a project they were doing in collaboration with an anti weapons proliferation campaign, where these are not everyday icons that are about stopping the spread of missiles. So this was something where it was really important to get it right and to have something that was bespoke to the campaign. And so one of the first things you do if you need to make bespoke icons is you start there. You start with the assets you're going to use to then build up the design language. And so that's what we did for this Wessex project, but that's often what I do in collaboration with these designers. That's one of their specialties of Open and Honest, is bespoke iconography. And when we're thinking about those visualizations, it's really about how do we use color and mood, and how do we capture the right feeling for the right audience for the project. So these are just a couple examples on the one side, you're seeing a project we did called Care Time COVID-19, and that was about kind of capturing this sort of surreal moment of the early lockdowns when people didn't really know what to do with themselves. And that was a health and well-being campaign that we ran using these kinds of surrealist colors and imagery. On the other side, you're seeing a project they did with a different client that was about nature and nature connections and kind of climate and wildlife. And so you can see these really natural kind of colors, this kind of softer approach being chosen there. And so this is just to kind of say, okay, this is the same, if you've got a good graphic design partner, they can do all of these things, right? So you really is about bespoking to the project and to the mood, and using that full range of what it is that you can create bespokely if you have the budget for such things. This was now moving from kind of slightly better funded projects to a very, very limited budget project. And these were done with Dr. Alexandra Alberta, who's also an illustrator. And this was just a kind of cheap and cheerful comic that we put up kind of converting some of the stuff that was being said and kind of creating some data visualization literacy through this little pamphlet that we made. And one of the things that we found really useful is to just visualize experts. So if we're talking about something that's a hard concept, just putting the person in and giving it that human face can make a big difference to that kind of communication. If you have even less money, like no money, and you are needing to make some visuals, of course, we now have an increasing amount of tools. And of course, people are going to have mixed feelings about using these tools. And we don't need to use all of them. We can choose which ones we're comfortable with using. This is just, here is a little play with Leonardo AI. But other ones that I often recommend are Comic Gen for creating comics, which is kind of a Canva of comics. Canva, which I'm sure we all know, CapCut, which is my favorite free video editing software, also comes with, some ethical concerns. And then meme generators, there's loads of those, and these can be useful to use as well. And again, of course, you're going to have what you choose is also going to be restricted by who you work for and what kind of guidelines you have to follow. But lots of choices out there now for playing with visualization. So I'm actually going to talk about videos in terms of visualization for the case study of the project that we did. And we've tested these, so hopefully they're going to work when I play them. And I'm going to talk you through some of the visuals that we made. So we decided to do two main types of visuals and one little side type of visual. And that's something called a vox pop, which is an excellent choice if you want to get a lot of people's voices and you don't have a big budget and you don't have a lot of time, because they are... These are those videos that you often see where someone goes on the street with a microphone and asks someone the same question over and over again. So it means voice popularity. So it's like, what does the public think? What is the public's voice on this? So they're really useful, like kind of cheap and cheerful way of getting public voices in, and they're relatively easy to edit. So you don't need to have super advanced editing skills. If you have, Gen Z person on your team that likes social media, they are probably capable of making any of the things that I'm going to show you. And in fact, I learned how to use these tools from my own students. So so this is the vox pop video.
All of this data about them and all this information. And I think that those people see that and they see people getting all their information being leaked. So yeah, people are scared.
Yeah, so I think it needs to be explained how the security would work. So then we understand that other people can't get it, only professionals can go into it if they need to.
Maybe misuse of data. If too much information gets put out there and people use it to their advantage.
That the wrong sort of people getting hold of your data.
I think the biggest challenge would be gaining people's trust in the first place. It will need to be something that is proven to people, we are trustworthy. You can, your information, although yes, it would be shared for research purposes, is still personal to you.
So you can see that's the slightly pre-final cut website at NHS. One of the interesting just little tidbits on that I want to share is that you might have heard a baby crying in one of the scenes, and that's because we were working with a young parents group, and a number of the young parents had brought their babies with them because they don't have childcare. And one of the other collaborators really wanted us to get rid of the baby voice. And we pushed back and we said, you know what, that's not authentic. And this is all about creating authentic videos of voice. This is very much kind of trying to be informed by this style of video that doesn't do that. It doesn't have perfect microphone sound. It doesn't just edit out everything that you don't want in there. It's trying to capture that reality of what it's really like to work with the public. And we won, which was great. And I'm really happy that there's a crying baby in the video, though I appreciate that's not kind of the way that maybe NHS projects would normally do things. So the second video I'm going to show is these little narrative videos that we made. And we wanted the young parents to also have their own opportunity to script and tell stories from their perspective that would help connect the kind of abstract ideas we were talking about to these more kind of personal stories. And I will say that I am showing you one of the stronger ones that came out of the day, though they all have their own charms. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we made these two afterwards.
This is how many people sadly pass away from cancer each year. In 2017, my nan passed away from cancer. I had always wished that there was some way that I or anyone else would have been able to help her sooner and get that diagnosis sooner, because there would have been a way that we could have saved her. We're giving you the opportunity to be able to help people like her and many others. As part of this, you will automatically be opted in, so do your part, don't opt out, and help out.
Oh, that's a note to myself that I didn't do. All right, so I'm going to talk over this video, but it doesn't have words. So I'm just going to play for you the third type of video we made, which was a video of it's like B-roll. So it's like a video of stuff we were doing during the day. And I'm just going to have that kind of playing in the background because it'll give you a little bit of insight into what the kind of day looked like and sort of how did we get to that place. And then I'll show you some stills from it as well. So I'm just going to turn the volume off while I talk. So we set the agenda that's supposed to be pasted there, into two parts. The first part was that the facilitator who had already met with the same group, or in some of the same, not all the participants were the same, but a lot of them were, so that they already had this kind of trust relationship. And so they went back through, what are the key tenets? What are these key literacy elements? We brought those glossary cards that you saw, and everyone played with this kind of packet of glossary cards and researcher cards. We then had script worksheets for the scripts. So there were key things we wanted them to try to get into their scripts, and then they could pick which one they wanted to do and take it in different directions. Then we had a kind of storyboard template to help them follow it. And then you can see little glimpses of our studio in here. And then we set them up in this little, what we call our pop-up social media studio, in a room that they were comfortable in, that they had been in before, because we went to their space. We weren't bringing them to our space. And then we did a whole kind of pre-video thing with them where we get them comfortable. And then we did the Vox Pops first, and then we did these narrative videos after. So they also got to have a kind of chance to do something that was a little short before they did these bigger ones that were their narrative videos. So that's kind of how we put those together. And one of the important things that we thought about for this project was optimization. So we wanted these to be short because we wanted them to be for sharing on social media. We wanted them to go on the social media platforms that more young people are on. That's why they're also filmed in portrait and in a kind of sort of selfie style kind of forward-facing video. And so optimization is just about thinking about those choices before you start to do your filming and before you start to do your scripting, so that you know what it is that you are working towards. And when possible, we use a kind of modular design concept. And this is, again, from that sort of nature project of our design partners, where ideally you can use the assets from multiple kinds of visuals. And if, again, the more that you plan in advance, the more that you're then able to optimize what you're doing and put together those workflows that you need for wherever you are going to share your material. So there's a lot that goes in right behind the scenes to making this. And so this is just a glimpse at what our video prep sheet was like. And you can see a little bit of the studio there. And this is literally just a phone, a tripod, some Rode mics, and a pop-up green screen. All of the equipment together would cost less than £500. Maybe not including the phone, but we just used our own phones. And then we just kind of optimized the space we were in and kind of made it look a little bit more studio-like. So we don't need really, really fancy kit and really, really big budgets to produce this kind of media. Everything was then edited on free tools and not right to the kinds of standard of a super fancy sort of NHS video, or obviously not to the standard of commercial video. So it was framed as being social media video. This is another one of these little tick sheets we have that we can send around to you that we use to make sure that whatever we're creating has been optimized for social media before we do it. And the other resource here, the social media storytelling pick and mix, is a little guide we also brought on the day, and that has a bunch of techniques for how to kind of combine different elements of social media storytelling. So we can give you a link to that resource as well. So looping back is step 4. And for this project, what we did, what was make sure that those videos went back to the group, and that's why we did the behind the scenes video as well, because we wanted them to have this footage of the day. And we had some really wonderful discussions with how much confidence and how empowered people felt by getting to participate. It was an opt-in to participate, so you didn't have to be on camera if you didn't want to, and one person wanted their voice on camera but not their face on camera, so all of those options were given, and all of those options were taken. And I think this was one of those really meaningful projects where I wasn't anticipating how much I would get out of working with these young parents for the day either. And then, of course, all these resources, they were for them, and they got to keep all of these kinds of resources as well as the assets that they made. So finally, step 5, promoting. And one of my big things here is that we can't just make the assets or make whatever it is and then kind of put it on social media or put it on our website and hope that people will see it. We need to be doing more and more creative things with the campaigns or the kind of documents that we're using. So I'm just going to take you through a few things that we've done. And I'm sure people also, please in the Q&A also, if you just have experiences of times you've done something a little outside the box to promote a campaign or to share the comms materials or the storytelling materials you made, please do share that with everyone. So one of the big things I see people do wrong or maybe not that sensibly with their budgets is make really fancy websites when they don't need them. So a lot of times these kinds of assets can be stored on a very, very simple and ideally static website. And the important thing is that it's really easy for people to find the resources, download them, watch them, share them, whatever it is that is your primary goal. So this is just an example of one from a project we have where the big thing was that we were offering this resource downloadable and printable in multiple languages. And this is it. It was, you scroll down one page, you get your resources, you click some buttons, they come out. 2 colors, very simple, nothing fancy, because it's not worth putting all that effort in if the goal is just to have people, if your conversion goal is just to have people download or watch the resources. We don't need lots of flashing things talking to us, lots of pages, lots of distracting images on a website. The other thing that's been really useful is going to places where our audiences are, not expecting them to come through to you. And of course, lots of us in the public engagement world like to take part in these various kinds of festivals. And I think these are great. These are some images from the British Science Festival a few years ago. And one of the things, again, here, thinking about how you can multi-use a resource is if you've created for something for social media, so you're looking at on that gallery wall, they give us a stone like staircase or whatever that was, and some like pins for a piece of wire, but we made it work. And those are just blown up Instagram posts with some text around them. So we can always be sort of reusing assets and creating things. And then on the other side of the slide, you're seeing that pop-up social media studio again. It's a really fun thing to do. Again, not very expensive, and people really enjoy taking part in that. And then you can make and edit live videos on the day. So I encourage you, if you've never done a pop-up social media studio, to give it a go. So for this project in particular, we've only just really started promoting it. Part of that is being here with you today and sharing the process of making these videos, which is great. And we also did a little event a few weeks ago where we shared some of the static visuals. And you can see again here, these are just those same small pamphlets just blown up really big. And so they're designed intentionally to be used at these different scales. So we've got one design asset that can then be used for multiple purposes. Again, another really important kind of budget saving technique. So I know that was a very rapid fire 5-step tour through my top tips. So happy to take questions. And you can also, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I often post slides and extra tips on these kinds of things. And we also work with groups. So if you're ever looking for a collaboration, feel free. Probably LinkedIn is the best, or you can email me to get in touch. So thank you very much for your time today and for joining us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anna. I'm sure I will not have been alone in scribbling down so many notes during your presentation, because there was a lot in there and all amazingly helpful. Really great to see things for a variety of budgets as well, and that off-the-shelf stuff. That was fantastic. There are lots of questions in the chat. Just to reiterate that this has been recorded and will be circulated amongst everyone who signed up as well. So I'll just dive into the questions with you, Anna. The first one is, what would be your top tips for creating visual abstracts of our research projects?
Abstracts like you've written an article and you want a visual abstract.
Yeah, visual abstract of kind of research papers.
Yeah. I think you can go kind of through that same process, but just in a micro level. So again, I think the first thing, especially if you're not usually a visual thinker, is to start by visually thinking. And one of the things that's super freeing in visual thinking, and like the opposite of what we do for a peer review paper, is that it doesn't matter what the topic is. You just find some stuff that looks like what you want your thing to look like, or that looks like whatever weird fuzzy thing is in your imagination, and you just start pulling it together. So when we do these concept boards, like the one I was showing you videos that were for the actual like similar videos, but when we do it for like our color palettes or like our style, we could be pulling something that's about like a race car or about a toothpaste, and to talk about data, right? It doesn't matter what the thing is. And so then you all of a sudden start to get in that space, and you're like walking around and we're like taking photos of things we see on the street or on the tube, and you're sending them to each other. And so I think getting into that free space that lets you think in this completely different way than the rigidity that we need for a peer review publication, especially in data sciences, is such an important first step. And then if you're going to do it yourself, have a play with some of these tools, unless you are a secret illustrator. And again, XKCD is a really good example. It doesn't need to be complicated to be visual. And you can find some other, and also Alex's, so the comic illustrations you're seeing throughout this are Alex Alberta's, and she uses a really simple style here too. She is a trained artist though, so don't be fooled. But if you don't be afraid if you do have some art skill to do it yourself. And then otherwise, I would say use those tools, or even if you have a small budget, if it's just a visual abstract, so you're just making like a single pane comic or something, you probably can get that done by an artist for between kind of 300 and £1,000, depending on how back and forth you're going to go. Or you might be able to collaborate with an art school or someone out of uni. So start thinking kind of creatively about what you can do with a small amount of budget, but do pay artists, even if they're students. Please do pay artists.
It's a very, very important message, and yeah, a lovely opportunity to think differently about your kind of research as well, with all those ways that you suggested as well. Our second question is, I'd be interested to learn if and how you evaluated the impact of these visuals. So did your intended audience get the messages you presented via these projects?
So these aren't actually at that stage yet. So one of the interesting, we'll call it interesting because we're recording, things about this project was that we were only hired in to do this one piece of it. So like we didn't even get to design the website where the things were hosted. We literally were only there to make the assets, which is not how we would do things normally, because having control over that full workflow so that you can do proper evaluation is really crucial. But to do proper evaluation, you also need to be making the strategic decisions about how you're going to communicate the objects. So we were not invited to those discussions or decisions. If anyone from that group is listening to this and would like to involve us, we are still here. So we actually, this is one of those kinds of weird moments as a creative where you're kind of detached from what happens next. But if I am in kind of full across a full spectrum or life cycle of a project, then yeah, I would use metrics evaluation on the social media platforms. I would use whatever kind of point backs were on the web platform I was using. So the combination of Google Analytics and social media analytics, and then also doing some, ideally, if there was some budget or resource to do it, we would normally do some kind of like testimonial or little like follow-up interviews. And then there was like a standard kind of PPIE evaluation form that the PPIE lead, again, because we were like lots of micro parts on this project, so the PPIE lead did do that sort of impact evaluation with the youth group. So yeah, I think it is really important to track these things so that we can talk about the effects of the stuff that we make. And also more reason we work on a model where creatives and designers are part of the full scale process when I am in charge of the budget and the project. And I think that's really important for that reason too, because then it's like you're making the decisions of how to optimize your concept, your visual, your writing, in order for it to hopefully have that dissemination and impact. And then when you're evaluating it based on the design decisions that you made. And so it's really useful if you can have your creative team be part, even if it's in a small way, across the full range of the project.
That's really useful because I think that's something that people could overlook and think that there's only one bit to involve people in. But yeah, that importance of having the right people across the full spectrum of the project, hopefully really helpful for people to think about. The next question is, what do you see as particularly different or special about storytelling when it comes to data science compared to perhaps when you're talking about other types of research?
Well, that's a really good question. So what's particular about storytelling? I mean, the starting place is usually that the numbers are really big or complicated. And I think you're going to have a talk in a couple weeks from Beatrice, who's a wonderful statistician who's been working on some of this. And I think she'll go into that in more detail, like what do you do when the statistics are so complicated? So I think that those are big challenges. The other thing, security and data breach are always on people's mind. And the more that we're using this kind of fuzzy thing around administrative data links with people really don't get it for the most part, and I think it's really important that we are honest and transparent about what we're not being honest and transparent about. Which is complex, right? But also that like things like synonymization and anonymization, we didn't realize how much explaining those would need. So I think that's the other place is people really are worried about the data security and this kind of anonymity pseudonymity issues, and also for particularly marginalized groups who have had data used against them, and right, as we're seeing in things like the trans community right now are having data used against them. There's a lot there to deal with, and again, I think we need to be really honest about that in the projects that we're doing and really careful. And so the storytelling has to have a kind of sensitivity around the people that we're talking about and what those histories are. Like, why are people not just mistrustful, right? And not just try to sweep it under the rug and tell people we're doing things for their benefit, but really engage with that sensitivity.
Thank you. That's some fantastically helpful points for people to get thinking about, I think. The next question is, what makes something a story versus another form of communication?
Oh, I mean,
quite conceptual now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and this is stuff I think we're going to create some resource around. But for me, a story has a kind of has its kind of basic storytelling element. So it has a character, it has a point of view, and it usually has some kind of conflict or tension. So if you think about Milo's little story about Hernan and the conflict of if we knew sooner. So what makes that a story is we've got a character, Hernan, we've got a point of view, I'm telling you a story about my nan, and we've got a conflict, which is if only we could have known sooner, if we had better data or better data research on this, we might have been able to save her or save others. And so that conflict or tension creates the kind of drama that makes something into a story. So when we do workshops with people, we break all these components down and we work on all of this with you, depending on your data project.
Thank you. That's really helpful. The next question is, do you have any resources or advice for communicating research to older adults as well? You've spoken a lot about work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, right, we use so many digital solutions now. One of the things that was important to us to have that static campaign and a number, especially since our PPIE was done in Dorset as well as Hampshire, so where we have higher older populations, a lot of the reason and the approach we took to some of those static visuals that were all printed materials was trying to take into account that kind of wider range of audience. And that's not to assume that all older populations are not online, but like I wouldn't be optimizing social media video as my first choice for older populations, though that is changing. And I've got a wonderful PhD student who is doing a project on grandfluencers, which are people over 60 and 70 that are influencers on social media. And I think that's another really undertapped thing. Like, let's get older people involved in these kinds of co-creation projects. Like, I would love to do the same project with an older community group instead of young people and see what happens. And we're really seeing this. I'm doing some work on AI at the moment, and we're the most interesting groups are the oldest groups and the youngest groups. And I think there's something really untapped, and also bringing those groups together in some of our public engagement.
I love the term grandfluencers. It's amazing. And yeah, it would be so interesting to see how that looked different stylistically and content-wise done with
Yeah,
older
yeah, and
adults.
it is really interesting. I mean, I'm excited to see because she just came back from field work, so we'll see her findings, and maybe I will do one of these with her one day, and we could focus just on that. I think it's just such an interesting question, and something we make a lot of assumptions about that we don't necessarily really know that much about when we make those assumptions. Which isn't to say, of course, there's a population that is not digital that we do need to be reaching through more traditional kinds of media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a fantastic session. I would certainly be there, and I'm sure many others would be as well. The next question is, what sort of questions were used in the PPIE sessions? It sounds like you weren't just asking for their stylistic ideas directly, but came to your stylistic choices indirectly through analysis of comments made in the session. Was that the case, or so what sort of questions were being used in the
That's
sessions?
a really good question. So it's and I can ask if there might be permission to share some of those things. So the way that the particularly the peer team, which is the Bournemouth University-based public involvement and engagement team works, and I do a lot of work with them. Is they really tailor what they're doing to different groups. So when I work with them, I create a whole handbook of possible activities. And for this one, we had a whole list that one of the other collaborators on the team came up with of just more standard PPIE questions. What do you think of this? What does this mean? So we had a whole list of that, your normal questions. But then I added to that these kinds of creative engagement questions. So it was if you had to draw data, what would it look like? What is, what's a metaphor you would use to represent security? Or we'd have them annotate something that was already drawn or look at some images and critique them. Not necessarily our images, but other kinds of existing images. And there was also a wonderful report done by Understanding Patient Data, who might be, I don't know if they're a PEDRI partner or not, but do really great work. And they did a whole report, and then we were sharing resources throughout the project too. So they also did this whole amazing report on how to visualize data journeys and user journeys through data and stuff. So it's a mix of your more standard and then your more kind of visual designy questions, and then also getting them to do things and not just answer questions. And so then they'll, depending on the kind of group, what the meeting is it 5 people at a community group, or is it an online session with 20 people? Are they younger? Are they older? Are they digitally savvy? Are they not? And then they would tailor what they were doing from this kind of facilitator pack to the group that they were working with. And then they do magic when they put these reports together, and they manage to kind of pull out themes from across the groups regardless of the way that they ran the session. But then they annotate, how did they run the session? What activities did they use? Who was there? So we get a report that's really comprehensive that has all those kinds of things in it. And again, this is only possible if you have a wonderful PPIE team and you have enough budget to have a creative team that is separate from your PPIE team. So that is not always possible, right? But I do think making a little pack with a few options, even if it's just a 1-pager, can be a really good idea. So it's rather than trying to force every participant into the thing that you are envisioning. So kind of meeting them halfway with where they are and having different ways of getting the same information or answers or voices that you need.
That's a really useful approach. And I think it is useful to know what you can do if you are in a lucky enough position to have people and budget. Rare, but every now and then it happens. So I think that's useful advice as well. And I'm sure people would appreciate if there is anything you can share from that project as well. Understanding Patient Data are a PEDRI partner. So it's great to hear that you worked with them on that as well. There's still plenty of questions, and we've still got kind of 5 minutes, so I'll move on to the next one. I know this one comes up a lot in conversations. What kind of consent do you get for the pop-up social media stuff? Did you have to get university or other ethics approval to conduct all these activities?
Yeah, so again, in this particular project, because we had PPIE leads, they led on that. But yes, they had gone through, I think that the PPIE ethical consent is a slightly different process than the full research ethics consent, because you're not using people as research subjects. You're just asking for their kind of opinions, and they're completely anonymized. You don't really even record demographic data or anything. It'll be a group of people between these ages, and there's no names or anything on any of the kind of transcripts that we get. So it's really different than research subject data. So there, and then there is an information, participation form, and there is a little consent form. And we had to do those with anyone who went onto any kind of filming. And that's why, again, especially for this kind of project where you're going like into a space with a community group, like having those different levels of engagement that people can have. So it's not like you're in or you're out. It's like, okay, you can come and do the chatty part. You can come and write a script, but not be on video. You can write a script and just be on audio. You could come and do the whole thing. That worked really well, I thought, because it let everyone get involved to the extent that they were happy to, which is ideally what we're doing consent for, right? Like is to have that range of involvement be possible and to let people feel really comfortable to not do more than they want.
How did that affect how the project ran in terms of like continuity with those bits and pieces, or was it fine having people kind of
and again, because it's PPIE and not research, like if you don't go in, like I think especially when researchers do PPIE, we do it as either it gets done as like a tick box exercise of, okay, I talk to the public, I ask them my 5 questions on my sheet. Or it gets done as if it's research and we don't quite understand the difference. And it's like, this is my focus group and I must have these many people and I must get through this much content and then I must produce. And that is not what PPIE needs to be, right? So like it can fit in this kind of public engagement can fit in this much more amorphous, qualitative, creative space. And so our remit was just to make some videos. So when we write the proposal, we're like, we'll make between 3 and 7 videos, they'll be about this long. So we're just more the way you would approach an art project. Like you let the creative space give room, right? You give parameters, you give indicative content. You don't say, I'm going to have exactly 5 people from these different demographics. You just have to be a little looser, be a little more lateral in your thinking. At least that's my approach. That doesn't need to be everybody's approach. But it's what has built very trusting and sustainable relationships is taking that kind of more loose, feeding off each other approach.
Thank you. I think they're really helpful for the addressing that ethics question as well. We've got 2 minutes. I'm going to squeeze in maybe 2 questions. So this next one is, do you have any suggestions for accessibility or inclusivity for assets for people with neurodivergence? So for example, I know a lot of people with learning disabilities like photo symbols, but they're expensive and they could be prohibitive for certain topics. So do you have any advice around that neurodivergence kind of area and accessibility?
So I more so for the co-creation aspect of it. So again, like I've learned so much from working with Peer, who are partners on this project and a couple other projects. And they've started to do a lot of the kind of best practice stuff for when you're actually in the space together. So like having a quiet room, having fidget toys. Actually, in one of the people in the Vox Pop is playing with a fidget toy. And it's another thing you can kind of hear in the background. And so like having that kind of thing available, having these spaces people can go, having these other having those varied modes of engagement that people can have. There's another wonderful project that they do where you can, like, the participants can choose whether to like share their voice by talking to somebody, by drawing, by painting, by making collage, and they just have like a table with all this stuff available and they can just approach it however they want. And then they've created this like beautiful kind of flag kind of patchwork quilt thing out of it. And so it's like you're getting voice in all these different ways that are things that the person who is speaking is comfortable with. And then by doing that, you're then producing texts that are going to be accessible in different ways to different people. And I think it's a quite lovely little loop there where, like, if you're taking account of neurodivergence in the actual public engagement and co-creation, then you're going to produce things that are necessarily going to be more inclusive because of that.
That's great, fantastic. And I'm going to squeeze in a final question. How did you incentivize community participation?
So I think for my understanding, I'm assuming that it's similar to the projects I am in charge of, that I have the same public engagement collaborators for, or public involvement collaborators for. We cost in time for community facilitators. We cost in the time for our in-house experts. We cost in time for the participants, which, depending on, like, I think if they're younger people, usually it's a voucher rather than money. But that's all costed in at I think they use the NIHR best practice amounts, because I think those are a little higher than the other groups. I think those are the ones considered the fairest. Correct us in the chat if I'm wrong. And I think that, and the thing that I really like that they do is that they cost the community leaders in as well, because then when you're there, it's like there's all this, everyone is on board because their time is being respected and their voices are being respected and they're being treated like experts and like part of the team. And again, obviously we don't always have the budgets to do that, but then have less groups and give them more money.
Yeah, and like you were saying about paying the artist, like costing in everyone involved in the process. I think that's a useful advice to finish on. There are plenty more questions. We will be seeing whether we can pick Anna's brains about some of those and make sure that that comes out to everyone who's registered. We are unfortunately at the end of our session today. That has absolutely flown by. This webinar is part of a series, so we would really appreciate any feedback that you have. And there's a QR code there on the screen to do that quickly, and there'll be a link that will be circulated as well. And I think there's a link in the chat as well. We'd really like to hear what kind of events and what kind of topics you would like to see as well. Anna's spoken a lot about resources, which handily leads me on to the PEDRI Resource Hub. PEDRI have brought together a lot of resources that can help you in your public involvement and engagement practices. You can, if you have resources that you think other people would like to use, then you can upload your resources using the upload form. And this resource hub is being grown and added to all the time as well. So we're really interested to hear what you think about the resource hub. If there is something that you go on to that you're looking for and it isn't C, please contact PEDRI and let them know. Like I say, it's a work in progress. It's ongoing all the time. So we'd love to create things that will be useful for the community. Finally, I just want to say a massive thank you to Anna. That has been a really useful session, so much to take away, and I hope that everyone else has found it as inspiring as I did as well. And thank you so much to everyone who took the time to join us today. We'll hope to see you at a future webinar event. Thank you very much.